Hey there, I'm Tommy, a professional music producer and engineer, and today we'll go through some low-end mixing tips. I will cover the kick and bass relationship and how I personally approach it on my productions. Then I'll briefly mention compression types, saturation, and how they relate to harmonics, tone, and loudness. Everything will be practical, and by the end of the video, you'll be ready to approach low-end mixing at a professional level. My mindset when it comes to mixing the low end, it's like I need to place two elephants in the same car. The vocals are pretty much always the center and the main element of the song, and this applies to pretty much any genre which has vocals. But the body, weight, and fullness, all that lives in the low end. And in my opinion, it needs to feel just as powerful as the lead vocal. So it's about balancing the vocal and those lower elements to the point where everything owns a small seat of the car and just sounds right. And not every listener has thousands of dollars invested in consumer speakers. That's our job as the producer or mixing engineer of the track to make sure everything sounds good and people can enjoy the tracks anywhere. And that takes a lot of work and practice. Now I'm going to show you the session we'll be working on just so you get familiar with the project, and then I'll run you through the signal chain. So this is the project we'll be working on, and I want to start by mentioning the kick and bass relationship. This is where most producers do common mistakes, because let's say they make a sound great individually, like the kick or the bass. Then once they put it all together, then everything will sound great. And then they play the track and suddenly it just doesn't sound great. That happens because all the sounds live together and they work together. There are lower frequency sounds coming from all sources on a project, many sources on a project, and they just need to work together. So by applying stuff to a sound and making it sound good by itself, it doesn't mean that it will sound good when you play it in the track. So you need to be aware of the context and of the composition you're working on, and you need to apply whatever it needs to make sure everything works together. One common fix is sidechaining the kick to the bass. There are many ways to do it and no right answers. For example, you can duck the whole bass signal using a compressor, but you can also send it to, let's say, a dynamic EQ or a multiband compressor, or even things like Suit 2, which I'm actually not even sure what that is, but I know it's none of those. So there's lots of things you can do, and there's no right answer, just whatever works for you in the project. The way I approach sidechaining and which technique to use, I would say, depends on the project. So you really just need to listen to whatever you're working on, and every low end has a different issue and might need a different solution. So you just need to listen and just think about what makes more sense to the composition. So for this particular project, I felt like a regular sidechaining compression would be the best option. So I'm sidechaining the whole bass signal every time the kick hits. But again, doesn't mean you need to do this every time. It's just what I felt like was the best option for this project. The project is very acoustic and there's not much stuff happening. So I would appreciate some movements on the track by the kick and bass working together. And here I'm sending the kick to the bass just so I can then apply it on the sidechain of this compressor, which is plugged into the track. So here I'm sending the kick to the sidechain, just so it triggers a compression. And again, the goal is for the whole bass to duck every time the kick hits. I'm looking for a call and response effect, which makes them both work together like this. So let me play this for you, and then I'll move the faders slow as you can hear. So this allows me to bring in the bass without masking the kick, which just makes the whole thing a lot louder. We also get the punch and full definition of the kick by removing the bass whenever it hits. Next, I want to focus on getting both the kick and bass a lot louder in the mix. This doesn't necessarily mean that we need to push the volumes up, as that could potentially make us lose the balance between the tracks or just make the mix sound muddy or boomy, all things we don't want. I'm going to start with the kick, and here I'm going to show you what I did to really make it cut through the mix. Here, I'm using Saturn 2 to push the kick into the upper frequencies. This plugin works really great here because it allows me to create individual bends, which I can then excite individually. Since there's a solid foundation and I'm only trying to make the kick clearer and translate better on different devices, I want to focus on the mids and gently push them to the higher frequencies, which I will boost later with an EQ to make them even sweeter and nicer. So here I've got a band on the subs up to 60 Hz, which I've bypassed. Then I've got a mid band which goes from 60 up to 3K, and then from 3K to all the way up. I'm exciting them individually with slightly more saturation on the mid band. Here's a before and after. Now if you notice, it actually sounds brighter and more in your face, and that's because when most people think that they need to make the kick louder, they often think that they need to work on the lower frequencies, but actually the definition and those details that just make the kick a lot sharper and easier to hear, they live in the higher frequencies, which we are boosting here by applying saturation. Now, by applying an equalizer after, we'll make those frequencies even sharper and more noticeable. So by doing so, it just gets easier to identify on the mix, and this will all make sense once we play it all together. Next, I'm adding some top end and boom to the kick using an equalizer. I'm also using the Pull Tech plugin specifically because it just colors the sound the moment it's applied. You just insert it on the track and it changes the sound. And that's exactly what I want. I want the brightness and richness of this plugin. So here I'm boosting at 60 Hz and then I'm gently boosting at 8K, just so I can get the skin and high end of the kick a bit louder in the mix. So let's play it before and after. Then I got another EQ, and the plugin I went to is the SSL G channel. I just love the way it sounds, and I'm using it to bring the low end of the kick a bit higher and also to just make it sharper on the top end. I've also enabled the analog button just so I get the SSL sound signature on the kick. So just to quickly go through the plugin, here I've got a high shelf at around 12K, then I'm boosting at 5 to 6K just so I can get the skin sound a bit more up front. And then finally, I've got a boost at 500 Hz and also at 120, just so I can get more low end as well. So I'll play it bypassed and then I'll activate it. So at this point the kick is super bright. Now I want to move to the bass and add some saturation as well. Here I could use the Saturn 2 as well, but I'm using the BWAP saturator and I'll show you why. The BWAP is a bass saturator plugin which allows you to shape the bass in great detail. It was designed specifically for this purpose, so it works great and can work in any scenario. Here, since I've really pushed the kick to the higher frequencies, I just need my bass to fill in the lower frequencies and then gently push it to the higher mids as well, just so it translates better on different devices. Always remember to keep an eye on those higher frequencies. So on this plugin, I've got the tone knob, which allows me to shape how high the frequencies go in the frequency spectrum. Here, since I don't want the bass to go to the higher frequencies, I've got it lowered a bit at about 40 degrees, just so it stays within the higher mid frequencies. Then you can change the saturation type and just boost the drive to really spray some color and definition up to the higher frequencies. And this is crucial because when you have a bass or an 808, its definition is not going to come true on consumer speakers. So you need to have these higher frequencies and you need to have saturation if you want the bass or 808 to really cut through the mixes. This plugin also keeps your sub intact, so it can really help your bass cut through the mix without losing any power. Next, I want to use some compression to make the low end a bit tighter. I will start with the kick, and here I'll just use a stereo compressor to react on the peaks. But listen closely, because there's a catch. Choosing the right compressor is 90% of the work. Choosing the right settings is only the remaining 10%. And this might sound ridiculous, but you will understand why. For the kick, I don't want to lose that clarity and punch we worked so hard to get. It still needs to feel alive and bright. So there are two things we will need. First is a fat compressor, which I've got applied on the kick, and second is an understanding of transients and how to shape sounds using compression. I'm not going to go through what a fat compressor is, how it works, and why we should use it or when, but if that's something you'd like to learn, then let me know down in the comments so I can cover it on a future video. For now, just know that they make the sound snappier, and you could use a different compressor type, like a VCA or even tube. But this will just lead you to a different outcome, which is not what I'm looking for on this particular project. And here I'm looking at a quick attack time to react to the peaks, and then a medium to fast release just so it gets some bite to it. And note that on this compressor, even the slowest attack time is still under 1 millisecond, lightning fast. So let me play it to you. The kick just gets more body, and it will become easier to notice on the mix once we play it all together. Moving to the bass, I'm using a multi-band compressor to subtly compress the subs and upper mids to make everything tighter overall. I'm running a linear phase tool since I don't want any phase issues in the subs, and if I do want any coloration or further processing, I can just use a stereo compressor afterwards. And actually, let me bypass all the plugins just so you can hear the difference on the full mix. This is without the plugins. As you can hear, there's a huge difference once you start adding these things together. So this is my approach on this particular song. Like I mentioned, any project is unique and might require a different approach. So there's no right answer, you just need to listen to the project and then make your own choices and decisions based on what you're hearing. But hopefully you learned something from this and how I approach the low end on this particular song. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.